our features editor of the ASPB journal, The Plant Cell. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few things just to make sure you get the most out of attending this seminar. Feel free to ask questions using the chat box in your GoToTraining control panel on the right. These questions will be read and answered periodically during the seminar as we transition from one topic to the next. There are some related materials and handouts which are available in your GoToTraining control panel, also on the right. A recording of the seminar will be made available along with associated materials within a few days. And if you need any technical assistance at all during this webinar, please feel free to email me at mbinder@aspb.org. And now I'm going to turn the seminar over to Mary.
Thanks, Melanie. My name's Mary Williams, and I'm the features editor of The Plant Cell. For the past several years, I've been creating teaching tools and plant biology series that I hope most of you are familiar with. And along the way, I've learned how to do some things using PowerPoint that make making images much easier. And today, I'd like to show you some of what I've learned. Also, I just want to remind you that we've started a discussion on the Planté site so that we can continue to share ideas and answer questions after the seminar is over. We've also sent you the slides that I'm showing. They were available to you through the GoToTraining website, and I believe we will be sending them out to you afterwards. But if you have any trouble getting the slides, just let us know and we can make sure you get them. So my contact information is here on the first slide, mwilliams@aspb.org, and on Twitter I'm @plantteaching. Well, I'm sure you are aware of why scientists need to use images, whether it's for research, teaching, outreach. You might need to make a graphical abstract like we do in plant cell and plant physiology. You might want to make a diagram that summarizes your research findings, or you might want to find a photograph of research that you can use for some sort of science communication event. We know that images greatly increase the engagement of the audience in the words that you're presenting, and also for students they greatly increase the retention of the information. So you should always think about how you can present the information that you want to convey visually as well as the words you want to use. Here's an outline of today's presentation. I'm going to show you how to manipulate and optimize images, make appealing diagrams, find images that you can reuse, and obtain permission to reuse those images. The first question is, can this information, this default PowerPoint bulleted list, be made more visually interesting? And one of the simplest things I'm going to show you is how you can turn just a list of words into a graphical image pretty easily. And that is using the SmartArt tool. So in PowerPoint, you can insert SmartArt. When you click on this tool, you'll get a list of different formats of SmartArt. And I'll show you how to do this in a second. But by selecting one of these icons, you'll get, for example, an arrow with little boxes in it, and you can type your words into these little boxes. The SmartArt always defaults to what I call Microsoft Blue, but everything about this SmartArt is customizable. So for example, I've taken the same image and I've changed the color, I've changed the font, I've changed the outline, I've changed the format of the little box, etc. So here's an example of how you can do that. If you go to Insert, SmartArt, for example, if we select this one, it will stick it on our slide, and then if we type in some words, one thing you can notice is that it adjusts the font size as you type in your words, so etc. And then when you're done, you can obviously customize it. So we can change to make these shiny boxes, and we can change the colors, etc. So again, it's very easy to use. I urge you, if you haven't played with it already, give it a shot. It's quite fun. Here are some of the different layouts you can use. One thing I'd like to point out is that the layouts actually convey information. So for example, this one suggests that there is a flow of information, or here a flow of information. Here we've got a cycle. We can see something is going around and around. This isn't necessarily a great way to to present my talk, because when I'm done with my talk, we're not going to start it all over again. But if you were presenting the life cycle of a plant, this might be a useful bit of SmartArt. Here we've got an XY coordinate where you might have something that was cheaper or faster. You could have the different quadrants representing different bits. Here again, we've got maybe year 1 leading to year 2, year 3, etc. Or here we've got a filtering. I think this is a nice way of thinking about how papers are, decisions are made about whether papers are accepted or not in a journal. Lots of bits of information come out with a single outcome. This is a piece of SmartArt that just came out in this month's Plant Physiology in the editorial about the journal, the special issue of the journal. And I thought once you are familiar with what SmartArt looks like, you'll start to see it everywhere. So this was just a timely example here. We can also use pictures with SmartArt. These are some clip arts that I got from PowerPoint, and I'll show you how to do that in just a second. So if you go to Insert, you can go to clipart, and then if you type in, for example, money, you'll get clipart, and these are approved for reuse. They're Creative Commons licensed. You can select just illustrations, just photographs, etc. So you can click on whichever bit of SmartArt you want to use, and it will import it into your slide. Once you've selected your images, if you go to the picture toolbar and picture layout, you can select the layout you would like to use with your pictures. So for example, we could have columns. So I've selected a bit of clip art that works with each of these topics. We can have columns, we can have this nice honeycomb pattern, and I've actually seen this honeycomb pattern used in an annual report for a research institute where they talk about the proteomics and the transcriptomics and the other things. So it's simply a nice way of taking information and making an attractive graphic out of it. Oh, customizable as well. Here's another one I found, and this is from an educational page just summarizing for students how to solve a word problem. So you've got your words, but you've got a nice graphic that goes along with each word. So that's all I want to say about SmartArt. Just to summarize a few things, it's a layout that you can use to reinforce your meaning. And I suggest that you think about what meaning you want to convey with your choice of SmartArt. I would also suggest that a little goes a long way. You don't want to necessarily have every slide filled with SmartArt because it can be distracting if you overuse it. If you're making a presentation, it's nice to use a consistent font and color palette. And that's one of the nice things about PowerPoint is that it's relatively easy. If last year you used green and this year you used blue, when you merge your slides, you can just change it so that all the slides have a consistent look and feel to them. When possible, replace or supplement words with pictures. It, again, reinforces your image, your message, and can use consistent symbols throughout your presentation. So before we move on to the next topic, I'm going to ask Melanie if there are any questions at this point. Melanie?
No, I don't see any questions at this point.
Okay. Well, don't forget that although we have muted you all, we do give you the option of typing a question into the chat box, and I'm not monitoring that, but Melanie is, and so she will interrupt me when a question or when the question slide comes up. She'll ask your question for you. Okay, we'll go on to the next topic now. This is I think one of the most interesting topics. It's how you can use PowerPoint to edit photos. Everything that I'll show you, you can do in photo editing software such as Photoshop. The nice thing about doing it in PowerPoint is just about everybody has a copy of PowerPoint on their work computer. You don't have to go out and buy something. And also, if you just want to make some minor adjustments to an image, it's just as easy to do it within PowerPoint as importing it from another piece of software. So I'll show you some of the tools you can use, the picture editing tools. If you have a picture, and we'll use this rose for our example. If you go to the Picture Tools toolbar, you can click on, well, I'll show you these different tools here, but we'll start with the Corrections menu. You can take your image and you can sharpen it or soften it. So here's our rose that's been softened. This is often used when you have a portrait of someone because it erases the wrinkles. It's a soft focus, makes them look nice and young. But you can also, if you have an image that's slightly out of focus, you can sometimes make it usable by sharpening it a little bit. It's not going to be a great image, but if it's something you really want to show people, it can tidy it up a little bit. Under corrections, we also have brightness and contrast, and you can see we have a gradient increasing contrast and increasing brightness. And again, it's just a way of brightening up or making your image a little clearer. Another set of tools we have are the color tools. So here we've started with our original image, and we've desaturated the color. So we've made the intensity of the color less. It's got more of a gray feeling to it. And here we've saturated the color, so we've brightened it up a bit, just using the color palette. Also in the color toolbar, you can change the colors completely. So you can take this image and make it into a black and white image, again, which can be nice if you're trying to make a attention-getting image. Or you can recolor it, so it's essentially a grayscale, but with purple or red or something, with dark background or light features. All these options are available in the color toolbar. And again, if you want to make a visually appealing picture, sometimes doing something, tweaking your image a little bit can make it more interesting. The artistic effects toolbar is quite fun. So if you click on this menu, you get a bunch of different choices here, and I've just shown you a few. There's glow edges. I think everybody's phone does these nowadays. There's plastic wrap, where it looks like you sort of shrink wrapped your picture. There's photocopy, which enhances, if anybody remembers back when you made photocopies of photocopies, you get this weird effect. And one thing I want to point out to you is that all of these different tools are, again, customizable. So this cutout tool, which is also known as posterize, is one of my favorites because it flattens your image into just a few hues. So any one of these, you can click on artistic effect options and you can customize it using those tools. So I'll show you this. If we start with our image, we go to Picture Tools, Format, and then we go to Artistic Effects, and I'll go to the Posterize tool and open the Options menu. What's interesting here is you actually get a very different look depending on how many different colors you have in your image. So you can decrease the number of colors, and then you've got just essentially a few, and then you can increase it and you get more and more information added. Again, it's a very visually stimulating way of presenting an image. Also, what you're doing here is you're actually overlaying a filter on top of your original image. So you can take that filter and you can make it more transparent. So now I've made it completely disappear. You can overlay it, make it opaque. So play with the tools. If you haven't used them before, now you know they're there. You can't break anything, and the undo button is your friend. So just mess around with something. If you don't like what you've done, undo it and start over. Another of the tools that I really like is the Remove Background tool. So if we start with an image, we go to the Picture Tools tab and we remove the background. We click on Remove Background. What PowerPoint does is it masks the background, and it starts by making a guess as to what it thinks you want the background to be. And it always draws a little frame in around your image. So the first thing you can do is you can adjust the frame. So for example, if I move the bottom of the frame down, then it recalculates the mask and it includes the pot. And if I move the frame up, it recalculates it just to leave the plant. But beyond that, you can also fine-tune the mask yourself using this toolbar, the mark areas to keep, mark areas to remove, delete, discard, keep changes. So to show you how to do that, I've used a picture of my dog when he was a puppy, and I wanted to keep the football in the background but remove the pile of rubbish that was behind him. So I wanted to get this image. In order to get this image, I selected the puppy and I clicked on Remove Background, and I moved the frame to include the puppy, and this is what I got. So some of the bits of what I wanted to be foreground, like the edge of the football here, were marked as background. And some of the bit of rubbish that I wanted to be background was marked as foreground. And then his little bald tummy was marked as background. So I had to correct these things. So using the Mark Areas to Keep tool, I went in and I drew a line, and then the mask was removed from the area I marked. And then using the mark area to remove tool, I drew a line over the pile of rubbish and got rid of that. And you can spend as much or as little time as you like doing this. If you zoom in, you can really fine tune and make it virtually perfect. But if it's something you don't need to be completely perfect, you can do a quick and dirty job and it will look pretty good too. There, I've fixed his little tummy. So
Mary?
once you've, yeah,
I'm sorry,
yeah,
I don't mean to interrupt, but we do have two questions, and I
oh,
think they
great,
were on
okay,
some slides that you
sure,
previously
yeah,
did. So
yeah.
there's one question, how to modify the shape of a picture from a square to a circle?
Oh, we're going to come up onto that in a minute, okay.
Okay. And the next question is, and I think this is going back to your first screen that had all the different options for the pictures, about
Yep.
which of these are appropriate for data. There are many rules about image manipulation.
That's a good question. I wouldn't use any of the artistic effects for data manipulation. The rule for data, if you email me, I will send you an editorial that the editors-in-chief of Plant Cell and Plant Physiology published. But the first rule is anything you do to an image has to be done across the entire image. So you can't obviously crop out something and lay it onto a different background. The other one is that you can't brighten something so much that you remove the background. So anytime you see a band that's completely against the white background, that's been inappropriately brightened. This talk is really more about making summary slides and graphics rather than using data. With data, you have to be much more careful about what you do. This is really about images for impact so that you can present a diagram or a figure for science communication or to give an overview of your research. But good questions. And please do follow up and I'll send you I've got a whole bibliography of do's and don'ts for data manipulation, or not manipulation, but processing, let's say. Okay, we'll go back to the puppy. Once you've taken your figure and put it on a background, and you can do this. If this is an Arabidopsis plant and you want it on a white background, that's okay as long as it's the whole plant. I just am showing you my puppy because it was more fun than cropping around every leaf on the Arabidopsis plant. And again, but if you're making something for to get undergraduates' attention and you just want a nice picture to draw their attention, you want to make something pretty, you can do these things like this. So I put a bit of grass in front of him, I put him on the beach, etc. If you are cropping around something that's very jagged, it's really difficult to get a perfect crop, and bits are left behind and bits are cropped out inappropriately. So one thing that works pretty well if you want to just make the bird more prominent against the background, for example, is you can crop it out and then you can maybe fade away the background a bit by brightening it or soft focusing it, and then you can reposition it on it so it becomes a little bit less obvious where the bits are missing, etc. And so that was a quick and dirty one I did. This is one I did for the conference we did last summer where we wanted to have birds of a feather tables. So this was a nice picture of a couple of birds of a feather, the same type of bird, but the background was really distracting. So I removed the birds and I flattened the background and then I replaced the birds on it so that the birds were much more prominent than they had been. Here's a couple more examples where I've used the remove background tool. This is a picture of a castle, and I wanted to use the castle as an analogy for a plant cell wall. And so I just removed the sky to make the knights, who are representing the plant defenses, and the ninjas, who are representing the pathogens, to make them stick out more prominently. Here's another one. I wanted to show that a tree can be very tall, especially as compared to familiar human monuments. So I got a bunch of pictures, and I'll talk later about how you can use pictures like this. I got a bunch of pictures of different familiar monuments, and then I removed the background from all of them. And this allowed me to put them all together into a single figure, and I could overlay them in front of each other. Instead of having different backgrounds and having them all lined up in a row, I could layer them in front of each other. Okay, just to really quickly show you how to do that, we'll go back to my dog, and here he is as a grown-up dog now. If you go to the picture tools, and then you go to the remove background tool, you'll see it masks, and it's by drawing this line in, it's gotten rid of some of the dog. So we'll move these frames. And so now we've got most of the dog, but what you can see is a little bit of his nose has been masked as background. So if I click on Mark Areas to Keep, I can draw across that. Now it's foreground. And then it's a little bit of grass. So I'll just zoom in a bit more. And I'll just get rid of that little bit of grass so it doesn't have the green bit. And then keep the changes. So now I've just quickly removed the dog from the background. So there you go. Right, so here we go. How do you make a rectangular figure into a circular figure? So this is another crop version. Instead of removing the background, we're cropping to shape. So if you select your picture and you go to crop, you can, obviously you know the crop tool, but if underneath it is a crop to shape tool. And so if you select that, then you get all the different shapes you can crop to. And as I said, if you look at a list of speakers in a seminar, often they're cropped into a circle, and it's just a very appealing way of presenting a picture of someone or a portrait. So it's a fun tool to use. Lots of other times you would want to crop to shape. I'll show you a few examples. Here's one. This is information about pressure and tension in plant cells relative to common household items, so water pressure, tire pressure, etc. Instead of putting this information into a table, as it's often presented in a plant physiology textbook, I wanted to use a picture to represent each of these different bits of information, a vacuum cleaner, etc. So one of them, a lot of these are just little bits of clip art, but one of them was a photograph of a pressure washer that people use to clean the streets. So I used a curved box tool to separate each of these bits of information. So I had to crop this into the curved box tool to make it work. And over here where the nurse is taking someone's blood pressure, I had to crop that as well. So there's lots of times when a rectangular picture just doesn't work, and even just cropping the edges into a curved box tool is more aesthetically pleasing. Here's an example of a thing I made last October to celebrate Halloween. I had pictures of various plants that have something to do with the sort of Halloween theme. So a bat plant, a vampire plant, a corpse plant, etc. So I cropped them into tombstone shapes or circles to make them, it wouldn't look as nice if you had little rectangles pasted around the screen. This had the background removed, so the ghost plants have also had the background removed. And then this is just put together with clip art to make this nice little poster. So don't feel that you need any kind of special skill. It's really just a matter of messing around and playing and making shapes and overlaying things. And the more you play with these tools, the more comfortable you'll get with them. Here's another example of someone who is actually a high school chemistry teacher, and he wanted to present information about chemistry to his students, and so he started making graphics, and I'm sure you've seen some of his pictures featuring chemicals. And so he goes by the name Compound Interest is his sort of stage name, his Andy Brunning, and in just a short amount of time of making these nice graphic images and putting them on the internet, he's become a real star of science communication. Not only does he have lots and lots of followers on Facebook and Twitter, but he's also published a book, and so now he's doing a nice book tour and you can see he's taken simple images and made circular crops and drawn some nice graphic things. So it's quite accessible to begin to use these tools and make images that you can use in your science communication or your teaching or your research. I'll just briefly show you how we can crop this to a shape, and I'm going to use this dandelion. So I'll zoom it in. Okay, so we go to, oh, this box is in the way, crop, and then crop to shape and circle. Notice that the rectangular picture has cropped into an oval, and I actually want to crop it into a circle. So I can move these in to make it rounder. If it was a perfect square when I started, it would have cropped to a perfect circle, but it's cropped it into an oval. But another tool I'll show you while we're here is that even though I've gotten rid of most of the background, you can still see there's a lot of darkness that we can peer through, and it doesn't look very nice. But another tool I can use is I can go to Picture Effects, and I can go to Soft Edges, and I can adjust how deeply I want to soften the edges of my picture. So here you can see it looks a bit more like a dandelion, having gotten rid of that sort of dark edge around it. So there's a whole bunch of different tools here, and I think you'll learn how to play with them. If you play with them, you'll become familiar with them and have a better sense as to what you can do with the different tools at your disposal. Okay, this is also really important, especially if you're published, well, editors really like to have your images lined up. So I just wanted to show you that when you are making a picture with lots of images, you can line them up using a variety of different tools. You can use the Align tool here, and you can align things by the top, you can align them by the center, etc. When you use this menu, you can see that there's grid settings, and I use the grid settings of having the objects snap to a grid, which makes things a little simpler when you're trying to move them around, that they will jump into position sort of magnetically. And also this displays smart guides when shapes are aligned. When you're moving two images beside each other, the line will appear when they're aligned, which is very handy. And also, if you go to the menu here, you can adjust the position manually. So if you're trying to line things up manually, you can go to this menu and you can type in the position you want it to. So you actually have a fine-tune ability of moving things around the screen as well. Okay, so that was just a few of the things you can do in terms of the image bar. You can adjust the color, you can adjust the cropping, you can add special effects, etc. Here's a Lego man that I cropped away from the background and added a shadow. I've removed the background. This was a very poor reproduction from an old plant physiology journal that had been scanned, and the quality of the picture was not very good. So I sort of worked with it by making it sepia and adding an edge to it to make it look as though it was meant to look old and not very high quality. So before we go on to drawing tools, do you have any questions about using the image manipulation tools?
Yes, Mary, there was one question asked, and it is, when you remove the background, is your picture still a square that would block an underlying picture, or can you crop to the outline of your picture?
Okay, that's a great question. I'm going to go back to the dog. When you crop, you've actually, this is now transparent, so I'll go ahead and stick a box in so you can see that. This is hard to do while I'm talking. Discovered, okay, so I'll put that behind. So you can see that I've actually removed the background. However, I can actually crop it further if I want. So without cropping the box, I've just removed the background, so I can go and I can actually crop it. So if you're just taking a tiny little piece of a very big picture, you might want to bring these lines in just so that when you're moving the object around, it's not massive. But you do actually make the background transparent. There you go. I hope that answers your question. Any more questions?
Oh, that's it for now.
Great. Okay, we'll move forward. Now we're going to talk about drawing. Yeah, we'll have time at the end for questions as well. So far we've looked at SmartArt, which just makes a little diagram that you can put words in. We've looked at starting with a photograph and doing things to the photograph to make it more interesting, or crop it, or change the background, change the shape. Now we're going to look at things you can do using the drawing tools. And so you'll see the menu in a second, but all of these are shapes that you can paste into your slides. And you'll be familiar with a lot of them from having made diagrams in PowerPoint. So here's a cartoon showing, again, the rounded box is a nice stand-in for a plant cell, and the nice oval is a nice stand-in for a pathogen, or an oomycete, or a bacterium. The lightning bolt is a nice stand-in for a break in a structure. So this is just the lightning bolt without any outline, and it's overlaid on top of the plant cell, so you can see that the plant cell's been broken. So using just these simple little shapes, this is actually clipart, and this is clipart as well. You can do a lot of things, make a lot of interesting little diagrams and pictures and cartoons using the tools. Here's another one that's simply tools from the drawing menu. So boxes, ovals. This is a freehand drawn shape, which I'll show you how to do freehand drawing as well. And then this again is clip art. So this represents CO2. So just if you make a sketch on a piece of paper and you know what you want your picture to look like, you can use the tools from the drawing menu to make a nice image for your work. This is again another example of a little tool, a little cartoon representing seed desiccation. If you make a drawing in PowerPoint that you maybe want to use in a slide for a lecture, or maybe you want to add to a poster or something, one thing I'll point out is that when you make it, it's a Microsoft object, and each piece of information remains its unique identity, so you can always move things around. But if you compress it and uncompress it, it does have this tendency to sometimes fall apart. So if you want to move it elsewhere and you know you're done with it, I always save it as the sort of PowerPoint drawing, which allows me to change it. But if I want to move it around, I will often convert it into a JPEG, because a JPEG will be a stable, static image that won't change when you, well, it'll degrade a tiny bit in quality, but it won't move around when you copy it or email it, etc. So that's just a bit of a caveat there. Well, here's a diagram, again, made just using the little drawing tools that are available to you in PowerPoint. Here you can see the lightning bolts. This is showing what happens to an animal cell when you put it in fresh water or salt water. So it's a simple little diagram that you've seen in all your textbooks. But in order to, I wasn't able to use, I wasn't able to get an open access drawing of this, so I had to recreate it myself. And then here I've taken it and I've shrunk it down. I made it into a JPEG and shrunk it down. And again, if you have words on it and you want to shrink it down, the words will stay at the font size that you've created them in. So if you want to resize it, it's often easier to save it as a JPEG and then shrink it. Okay. Any questions, Melanie? Are we okay?
No, we have one more question,
Okay.
And that is, can the drawing tools be used to draw chemical structures or formula?
Oh, that's a great question. You can get ChemDraw, and ChemDraw is a great program if you're going to be regularly drawing chemical structures. You have to buy it, and it's rather more complicated than PowerPoint. So you can also draw chemical structures using PowerPoint. It's just not designed for it, and you do have to be quite finicky in terms of making sure, for example, that your pentagons and hexagons are sized appropriately and having double bonds inserted into it. Chemical formulas, yes. In terms of a chemical formula, you would just use a font tool, and there is an option of having a subscript or superscript. So you can add superscripts and subscripts as needed within a font box. So the chemical formulas, if you just do a little bit, you can do it in PowerPoint. If you do a lot, I would definitely recommend ChemDraw. And anything more complicated than perhaps a couple of sugars stuck together, you really would have, I mean, anything three-dimensional, you would have a hard time with. Great question. Okay, so a few more things. We've looked at what you can do with shapes, and I think that a really nice thing to do with these shapes is to use a gradient fill. So if you haven't used a gradient fill, when you make a shape, you go to fill, you get a menu. You can fill with pictures, patterns, etc. But the gradient fill, what happens is you get a little box that looks like this, and you can define what color goes into each of these arrows. You can add arrows and you can take away arrows. So you can have a simple gradient that goes from one color to another, or you can have a really complicated, crazy gradient. And there are preset gradients as well, and they're a bit weird looking. So here's just an example where I took a box and I added sort of a rainbow effect using different colors. You can change it from a linear gradient to, well, from top to bottom, or from corner to corner. You can also make it radial, etc. So these are a bit weird looking, but if you use a more subtle gradient, you can have a nice shadowed effect on things, and it can be really effective. If you look at the diagrams that are made in a lot of, for example, the Nature Reviews articles, the shapes usually have a bit of a gradient to them, and it's just really aesthetically pleasing to see that. Here's a couple of examples. I had to draw a picture of a tracheid in a vessel, and if you just have a gradient that darkens at the edges, it gives it a bit of a three-dimensional effect like that. So I'll show you what that looks like. If we select just the drawing here, and we go to Shape Fill, and go to More Gradients, you can see that I made a gradient that just has a darker at the edges. I created that gradient. This gradient, you can see, has a tiny bit of a light bit and a dark bit and then a light bit. And that was actually a default gradient. That was an option when I made that circle. That was one of the options. So here we can see we've got an arrow, and I'll give it a gradient fill. Actually, if I start with just a shape, and I go to Shape Fill, Gradient. So you see you get these nice options. So the simplest one is just to select a pre-made gradient, but you can make your own gradient by selecting whatever colors you want and adding them in. I don't know why you'd want to do this, but just showing you how it works. And there you go. You've got a nice gradient. You can change the path of it. You can, oh, here's some of our pre-selected gradient, pre-made gradients. So again, lots of fun to be had with the various gradient fills. Again, thinking about your Nature Reviews figures, if you look at this, this little label, you can see it's got a slight gradient from top to bottom. Sometimes you'll see a gradient that's lighter in the center, so the words are more apparent. So get used to looking at these figures that you find attractive and thinking critically about how did they make that. And I think once you start looking at them, you'll realize, oh, okay, they took a rounded box and they made a slight gradient and then a little bit of a shadow effect, so a little shadow effect. If you go to Shape Effects, you can add the shadow. The shadows look great. It kind of pops out from the screen, and if you take away the outline, it becomes even more obvious that it's got a little shadow effect. Again, everything is it has start with the defaults, but then start playing with them and see all the ways you can make beautiful pictures using these tools. Okay, a couple more things you can do. You can use a transparent fill. So this was a picture of xylem pressure and hydraulic conductance transitioning from winter to spring, and it wasn't really obvious that this was a transition in the original figure. So I did an overlay of a transparent bar to highlight this transition. Here is a figure showing guard cells and subsidiary cells in grasses, and the original figure wasn't highlighted, so it wasn't really obvious what was happening. So by putting a transparent layer on top of the two different cell types, it was more obvious what was happening as the guard cell was opening and closing. So again, just one of the things you can do. Now this is the one thing I'll show you that is not available in PowerPoint, but it's a free tool that you can download, and it's really useful if you're going to be doing any kind of graphic work on your computer. It's called Instant Eyedropper, and if you go to the website, you can just download it, and it will sit in your toolbar. It looks like that. If you click on Instant Eyedropper, it'll ask you what form you want the information in, and PowerPoint defaults to RGB, so that tends to be what I use, but I found this nice picture which showed it in hex. But what happens is when you select Instant Eyedropper, after you tell it what kind of information you want, you can hold your mouse over a pixel essentially, and it zooms in so you can look pixel by pixel, and it will read out the color that that pixel is. And once you've recorded this, then you can go ahead and enter that color, and now you can make a custom color. So I'll show you an example of how this is useful. Well, this is an interesting aside. So this is a figure I used in the teaching tool about autophagy, senescence and cell death, and it was from a 2009 review article by one of our really recent Nobel laureates, Yoshinori Osumi. But in this nice review article, they talked about autophagy, and they talked about some other cellular recycling processes that I didn't want to include in the figure I was using. So I cropped as much as I could, but a little bit of the information that I was eliminating, I couldn't get rid of without losing the words. So there were various ways you could do this. You could just rewrite those words, but another way of fixing this figure is just to overlay the bits that I didn't want to be visible. So in the vacuole, which was white, I just made some shapes and put them on top, and then covered up the arrow and the vesicle. But here, this is a slight tan color. So I actually had to match my shape to the color of the background. And then when I removed the line, you can see that I managed to hide these bits of information I didn't want. So it's really useful if you're starting with somebody else's figure. You don't exactly know what color they used, but you want to cover something up. You can hide the extraneous information from your figure just by masking it. Okay, any questions before we talk about freehand drawing?
No, Mary, I don't see any additional questions right now.
Okay, great. So the second to last thing we'll talk about before we talk about permissions is using the freehand drawing tools. And I put this picture here to remind me to mention that, sorry, I have a drawing pad with a stylus. And if you do much graphic work with your computer, it's really useful to have a stylus tool that you can use because you have a lot more fine motor control than you do with a mouse. So for these kinds of things, I recommend using some kind of stylus as opposed to a mouse. So this is a drawing of a chlamydomonas cell, and the cell has a single chloroplast. And in the original image, the chloroplast is outlined in light blue, but I wanted to make that a bit more prominent. So I had to trace around the chloroplast and made a red shape that highlighted this margin. So when you want to do freehand drawing, there's 3 different tools you can use. This tool, each time you move your mouse or your stylus and you click, you make a point. And in this tool, the points are connected by straight lines. With this tool, the points are connected by curves, and you can control the steepness and the direction of the curve, which I'll show you. And then this is really a freehand tool. You can see how jiggly it is. And so basically every time you change direction, you get a point. So when I started using these tools, I thought I had to draw something perfectly the first time. But then I realized that because I have points, I can actually edit the points. And that makes it much more useful to be able to make a sort of a crude outline and then go through and refine it by moving these points around. So here's my chloroplast drawing I made, and you can see where the points are. So just as an example, if I select one of these points, you have to go to Edit Shape and then Edit Points. And then you can see your points now. So if you grab one of these points, well, you can drag it around, but also you get the line, the steepness and the angle of the line going through the point. So you can move these in to make the angle steeper. You can move them out to make it flatter. And then, oops, didn't mean to do that. You can rotate it to change the direction of the line going through the point. And so knowing that you can do that, you can actually begin to make some pretty good freehand drawings where you go through and fix your mistakes by editing the points. So I think that's a really useful thing to know when you're doing any kind of freehand drawing. And so this is a drawing I made mostly using freehand shapes and lines and drawings and blobs and things. And again, it's showing how an infected plant, pathogens can move from an infected plant to a non-infected plant. Here are a couple more drawings. This is a couple of algae, a bryophyte, and a tomato plant. So I hope that you recognize that even using a simple little program like PowerPoint, you actually have the tools at your disposal to allow you to make any kind of image that you want to, whether it's a simple diagram or if you want to make a drawing of a tomato plant or something. And it's just a matter of exploring the different tools and looking at other drawings and seeing how other artists have made the drawings, tracing a photograph, etc. But it is a very versatile program, considering that it's already sitting on your desktop. And I do urge you to explore the different tools and functions that are already in it. Questions? Okay, I'll go ahead and we'll talk about the legal business now. So if you want to make a presentation that you're only going to be using internally with your students and you're not going to be republishing it, then generally you're okay with using most images. I recommend that you always include an attribution, but if you're not republishing it or posting it on the internet, it's usually okay for internal use. And we'll talk about fair use in a second. But for any other use, whether you're putting it on Facebook or you're putting it on a course website or you're using it in a blog, any other use, you need to make sure that you're using an image appropriately. So the simplest thing you can do is you can actually search for images that are licensed for reuse. So if you go to Google Image Search, you can click on Search Tools and click on Usage Rights, and then you can select labeled for reuse or labeled for non-commercial reuse, etc. And then it will often cut down on the number of images you see, but at least the ones that you find, and I'm sure you've seen this one because this is widely used to show wheat stem rust because it is an image that's available for reuse. There are also sites you can go to where the images on the sites are available in the public domain. And I have a list of lots of these sites on the handout that is available to you through the GoTo training. So there's a bugwood site, which is full of images of bugs and plants. A USDA site, anything that's created by someone who's working for the federal government is in the public domain. So USDA is full of nice pictures of plants. Open Clipart is a site I use a lot. These are drawings that people make available for reuse without any restrictions. Some other really nice places you can go for images. The New York Public Library's digital collection is a great site for finding old photographs. And I'm sure you know this photograph. It's Dorothea Lange, and it's a picture from the the Great Depression, the Dust Bowl. And so this picture is actually in the public domain because she was working for the federal government when she made these pictures. So if you wanted to use this on a poster, you would be able to use it without restriction. Biodiversity Heritage Library has digitized lots of old books, including some really ancient plant anatomy textbooks. And you can get these fantastic hand-drawn pictures of bits of wood. And the Welcome Image Collection focuses on medical images. So here's a nice picture of a Chinese herbalist from earlier in the century. Great places to go and browse and find public domain images that you can use for teaching, science communication, whatever. Flickr is a photo sharing site, and again, you have the option of searching by Creative Commons license. And we'll talk in the next slide about the different kinds of Creative Commons licenses. But Flickr has lots and lots of photos taken by individuals that they've put online, and if they've put a Creative Commons license on it, it means you can usually use it for whatever purpose you have. There's different kinds of Creative Commons licenses. The most liberal in terms of reuse is CC BY, which just means the author requires attribution. And the most restrictive is this one, which requires no commercial and no derivative. So you should become familiar with the different Creative Commons licenses and make sure that you're using them appropriately. My husband is a photographer, and his images are all available through Creative Commons licenses, and he's got a whole set on plants. I've used quite a few of these in various teaching tools, so some of them might look familiar to you. And of course, they're available for anyone to reuse. And even some of the stock photo sites that are set up to sell you images, even some of those have free images as well. Obviously, you can pay for images, but if you don't have a budget, then you can find free images. So if you search for free files, this site has 73,000 photos, of which 128 are free. But these are pretty decent images. If you just needed a picture of a flask, that would do. So finally, the fair use policy. What this says is, you can Google it and read it yourself, but what it says is that if you're using the image for criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, including multiple copies for classroom use, scholarship, or research, is not an infringement of copyright. So the copyright is there to protect the author so that they can sell their work, which is reasonable. So if you're using it for a commercial nature or something that is you're trying to sell, obviously you don't want to be using someone else's work without giving them compensation. But for most of what I think you will be using images for, whether it's teaching, science communication, research, will generally fall under the Fair Use Act. If you're publishing a textbook to sell it, you will have to pay people for their images. But for most other uses, you won't need to. If you're using images from journals, all of the journals, some of the journals publish only under the Creative Commons licenses. And again, I have a list of those on the handout, but other journals are copyrighted, the figures from the journals. And I've shown you the ASPB journals use this symbol. This is the Nature, Rights and Permissions, and JXBot has a request permission button. So you can usually find where you go for to request permission. You fill in a form, and if it's for something that's non-commercial, they'll generally let you use it at no cost, but they do request that you ask formal permission. So that's the end of my presentation. I just wanted to really show you that you can feel free to start using images maybe more often than you currently are. Whether your message is light or serious, the images certainly do add impact. And please go look at the handout for some of the websites where you can find these fantastic images that are available for you to reuse. But also, please explore the different tools that you have already on your computer that allow you to create your own images. And I think you'll find that once you start doing it, you do begin to see that you can make exactly the image you want, as opposed to looking around and trying to find an image that someone else has already made. So thank you very much. Please, if you have any more questions, this is a good time. Otherwise, in the Planté discussion, it's open for questions, and we'll be answering questions sort of continuously from now on. So if you think of something next week, let us know.
And Mary, there is one more question that got asked,
Mm-hmm.
and that is, can we create moving images using PowerPoint? For example, an insect moving from position A to position B on a slide.
Yes, and I didn't talk about animations. That's a whole nother topic. But yes, you can. There's an animations pane, and just as with these other tools, once you start playing with it, you can get more and more sophisticated with it. But the simplest thing is if you have the image and you give it a start point and an end point, it will move, and you can adjust the speed at which it moves, whether it moves on a mouse click, etc. If the person who asked the question emails us, I can send them to a site that has a whole bunch of tutorials on using animations. I was thinking that we would do that as a separate discussion because there's so much functionality within the animations pane itself. Okay.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you very much, Mary, for sharing this very useful information, and thanks to everyone for also attending our first seminar today. Just so you know, the recording link will be posted in the Plante community within the next few days. Our next seminar will be on November 10th with Cristobal Huawei on getting the most out of RNA sequence data with expression visualization and integration platform, and we will be sending out the sign-up via email for that as well. Also, if you have any ideas for future topics, please feel free to email us at community@plante.org for consideration. Our follow-up email to you will include this information as well as a link to the Images for Impact discussion on Plante. So again, like Mary said, please feel free to join this conversation to continue the discussion, ask Mary additional questions, and share ideas. Thank you, and have a nice day.